Welcome back to this week's episode of the Campfire Series podcast. I'm your host, Logan Soforenko. We have a great month of podcasts ahead of us. I was about to say you, but I guess us. It's a collective us. But starting off with this awesome slate of episodes and interviews, we have the public address announcer of the Los Angeles Clippers who was so kind to take some time out of his day and talk with me just about the business, about his experiences, and also about his time in the NBA bubble. Please welcome to the Campfire Series podcast, Eric Smith.
I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to meet with me. I actually, so I don't normally go to basketball games, let alone Staples Center, because I don't really have time for it. But earlier this year, I went to 2 games in a row, and I feel like they were kind of the best Clippers games. I went to the Clippers Thunder. It was the first time Thunder met up with the Clippers since the Paul George trade, all that stuff. And then the following couple of nights, it was Celtics Clippers, the overtime game.
Great game.
Lou Williams went off. It was a very, very fun time. But I noticed that I kind of got introduced to yourself because, before the game, it says I'm Eric Smith, public address announcer. And I was just kind of following your craft throughout both games. And it was kind of cool kind of hearing how it goes because I'm, doing high school, so it's nothing professional. I haven't really studied how it should be done. So listening to a professional, it was very cool. So I appreciate that. But first things first, since I'm kind of a student, not only of public address announcing, but in general at college, first of all, where did you study? And also, did that kind of affect you now? Do you use your training, if you had any, in college, and if so, how did you use it?
Okay, back on here. Sorry, I was muted. Okay, so I started at Pasadena City College. Did that. I was a broadcast major at Pasadena City College, and then transferred to Pepperdine, and was a broadcast major at Pepperdine. My thought was I was going to do radio, not even TV. I thought I was going to do radio and just take that path. When I did a couple internships, I had put together a tape, and the only real offer I got was at a top 40. It was a combo station, the top 40s listening, and then I think the other half was rock or something like that in Havre, Montana. And I thought, do I want to move to Havre, Montana, about 100 miles from the Canadian border, having lived in LA my whole life? My girlfriend, now wife at the time, was kind of like, well, it's up to you what you want to do. And I'm thinking, yeah, do I really want to go to Havre, Montana? And then from there, the next step would be Billings. And then from there, go to, you just start to follow the path of what a lot of radio people do. And it's this usually time consuming, pay your dues kind of thing. And so I decided, no, I'm not willing to give up my life in Southern California. So I ended up going into, I did sales for radio. My God, what an awful job that was. It was a little AM radio station out your way. Couldn't even tell you what the call letters were. I worked there for a grand total of 1 month and hated every single minute of it. And then from there, just took a slow path. I did a little audio editing. I worked for the gas company and did video production stuff. I worked for a production company in Orange County, and just this very weird, bizarre, circuitous route. Did some freelancing stuff, did all that. And after a while, decided, back in high school, what I really wanted to be was actually a teacher. And my father was a teacher at the time. And when I was getting ready to think about what I wanted to do career-wise and college-wise and all that, and said, I think I want to be a teacher. He was kind of at the end of his career and was very much in a burnout stage in his life, and said, my God, why would you want to be a teacher? Don't do that. Go make money. Go do something. So I'm like, okay. So that's why I took the broadcasting route. I had a counselor teacher in high school who said, you should think about doing radio, because my voice was actually not too dramatically different than what it is now. And having my voice coming out of a high schooler was kind of weird, I think. So that's when she said, you got to think about radio. So all that to say then that I became a teacher. So I have been a teacher now for 30 years, but back in 2000, late 99, 2000, the public address announcer for the Clippers, who was also the PA for USC football and for the Chargers at the time, very interestingly enough, said, I need a backup. Here's what happened. I was reading names. So I'd become a teacher. I was reading names at graduation. You know, you read the full name of the person comes across the stage and do that. I was the guy. They said, would you mind doing the names? I said, sure, I can do that. It was a smaller school. I could read the names. At the end of the graduation, he came up to me and said, I need a backup. Have you ever done PA announcing? And I had done some at the high school where I was teaching. And I said, yeah, I've done high school football and stuff like that. And he says, well, I need a backup for the Clippers because I occasionally have a conflict when either USC or the pro football has a game on the same day as the Clippers. And I need somebody to fill in for me. Would you be willing to do that? I said, absolutely. That'd be great. So I was his backup for a season or two. He ended up having some contract issues with the Clippers. They then actually hired somebody else for 2 games, hated him, called me and said, would you like to be the full-time guy? And I said, yeah, that'd be awesome. So in 2000, I started with the Clippers as their full-time public address announcer. That year, I had done some freelance work. I was the slow motion instant replay guy for in-house for the Lakers. I had done UCLA stuff, some, all in-house production stuff. So I had worked for the Dodgers, done some stuff for the Dodgers. I was like a cable puller for the cameraman. You know, you just do all these things, right? When you're just trying to, find a gig. So they found out that I'd become the public address announcer for the Clippers. They were getting rid of their public address announcer that year also and said, do you want to audition for the Dodgers? I wasn't a baseball guy. It really wasn't my thing, but I'm like, this is the Dodgers. Yeah, sure. So I had an open audition for the Dodgers. It was in the off season there at the stadium. They set up a microphone. They gave me a little bit of a roster and a couple of reads. And the thing is about a stadium that big, there's a delay before you hear yourself. And it's about a half a second delay. So I start to announce and I hear myself back. I'm like, holy shit, what is that? What is this bounce back thing? So it's this delay. So that just screwed me up. So I ended up plugging my finger in my ear and reading so I could just concentrate on what it was I was doing. Horrible audition, just awful. But about a week later, they called and said, we want to bring you back for a second audition for, the second go round. I'm thinking, wasn't anybody listening? I sucked. What are you thinking about? He said, we're going to have a director with you this time, and we're going to kind of walk you through some of the stuff. Okay. So I have a second audition with the Dodgers. Boom. After that, they hired me. So at the time then, I was the Clippers announcer and the Dodger announcer. I did both of those from 2000, 2001 up through 2010. I then stepped away from the Clippers for a few years because my son was playing college basketball and I didn't want to miss any of his games. So the Clippers were great. They said, you can just go to his games and still be here. And I thought that's not fair because I'll end up missing 5 or 6 games.
Where was he playing at?
He played at a Division II school, Sonoma State.
Okay, right on.
Yeah. So, that's the other thing. I was going to have to, we were going north to watch him play and do all that. So I said, no, I'm just going to step away. And I was also kind of burned out doing both of them because between the 80 some odd games you do for baseball plus the 4 days, 120 nights I was gone from home. So I just said, I'll just do the baseball during the summer and that'll be fine. So I'm gone for 2.5, 3 years from the Clippers. The guy who took over for me was a guy named Dave Courtney. And Dave Courtney had been the Kings announcer for many, many years. He was the Angel announcer for many years. And then he took over as the Clippers announcer. Well, he had to go have a stress test. He was an overweight guy. And he was having a couple problems with his heart, and then he wanted to do a stress test. So he was going to miss a game. So the Clippers called me and said, would you mind coming back for one game? We need a fill-in for Dave. It had been 3 years, something like that. And I'm like, sure, that'd be fine. I'll come back and do a game. He has the stress test. The next morning, he has a massive coronary and dies. Yeah, crazy. So they're like, we don't know what to do. Can you please just fill in? We don't have a back. We have nothing. We don't have a plan for this of having our PA announcer die on us. Talked to my wife, and she says, yeah, you can go back. So starting then in 14-15, I guess it was, season, I went back to the Clippers. Around that time, that year, I told the Dodgers, because I was actually thinking of going back to school and getting my doctorate in education. So I'm like, you know what? I think I want to go back to school. The Clippers have asked me to come back. I can't teach, do Clippers, Dodgers, and go be in grad school. It's not going to happen. I ended up not going back to grad school because of some family issues that had arisen. It wasn't going to be available to me time-wise. So I then stepped away from the Dodgers, went back to the Clippers. At that time, USC football had auditions, and I ended up being USC football PA announcer. And I've been doing that since 2015. 3 years ago, the Chargers moved to LA. They did their auditions, and I was their announcer. So at some point, I've done just about every sport. I've never done hockey. And 2 years ago, LAFC called me and said, you want to audition? So I'm the LAFC announcer. So I've done every sport in LA. I was just in the bubble. I even announced Laker games while I was in the bubble. So other than and I've announced UCLA basketball one time. I've actually never done USC basketball, but I do USC football. I don't know. Yeah, so I do USC football. So anyways, all these things. So there's my little background. Your question was, did that prepare me? No. What prepared me actually was doing exactly what it sounds like you're doing. I just did high school sports. I did it for the school where I was teaching. I've done a couple other high school things. I've done the basketball for CIF, so I've done some high school stuff like that. But for the most part, no. A lot of it was having gone and listened to, I don't know if you've ever heard the name John Ramsey. So John Ramsey was the guy that was all of LA sports back in the 60s and 70s. So John Ramsey was the Dodger announcer, the Rams announcer, USC football, the Kings. He did them all in season. He was the voice of LA sports, at least as an announcer. And so I remember growing up going to Dodger games and listening to John Ramsey. If you went to football games, you heard John Ramsey and all that. So a lot of people in LA were like, they want to announce just like John Ramsey did. And John Ramsey had this beautiful baritone-ish bass voice, and it was very kind of staccato. So whenever you would like go to a Dodger Stadium game, he would be like, your attention, please. Very good afternoon and welcome to Dodger Stadium. So he had this very kind of staccato, but it was like, that's John Ramsey. So he was very well known. Well, the guy that I took over for the Clippers, a guy named Dennis Packard, he took over for John Ramsey. And when he took over for John Ramsey, people didn't even know that Dennis Packard had taken over because he followed Dennis Packard followed John Ramsey's kind of cadence and had that very rich voice. And for a couple of years, people go, is that John Ramsey? But it wasn't. It was Dennis Packard. And it was Dennis Packard's son who went to the school where I was teaching, and then he came to me at the graduation. So I took over for Dennis Packard. And then some people were like, is that Dennis Packard? And it's like, no, and I speak differently than those guys do, but there's some similarities. Similarly, when I left the Dodgers, the guy that they hired sounds very similar. So if you've been to a Dodger game in the last few years, people still think it's me there for a while until they've now realized, nope, it's a different guy that's there. But they were smart. They hired a guy that sounded really, really similar to me. And that wasn't the only reason. I think that just made the transition easier. He's really good at what he does. And so they hired a great guy that took over for me. So that's a really long answer to say I've had these opportunities. I've done a lot of these different things, but a lot of times you're just kind of, well, what sounds good and right to me? Don't be someone else, be yourself. Um, sometimes P announcers can have tricks, that they like, or they'll have, sayings that they want to do, or they'll do certain things that, gives them some personality and gives them their own touch and idea to it. And that's great. I think that's fine. But you have to always be yourself and always realize no one, not a single person, even when you went, was not there to hear the PA announcer. You are the background. You're there to help, but nobody's there to hear you. So um, I really just gave you I gave you a biography there, but a lot of that to say, my radio stuff didn't really give me any kind of background to PA announcing because it's different. You can't have that. So sorry, I had a really long answer for you there.
No, I really appreciate that. I actually love hearing that because it's also it's interesting to hear, you said about how a lot of people in this industry have to pay their dues before they get to, the big stuff. They got to go to
Right.
Alabama or Montana or somewhere crazy, and you chose not to take that path. So I think that's
Right.
really interesting hearing about that. But before we talk about the bubble, because the bubble was a great time, not for Clipper fans, but it was
until the end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it was such fun to watch as a fan, and also just I think everyone there was just so proud of how the league handled it. But walk me through. We're now in pre-quarantine, pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Walk me through a day of Staples Center. It's game time. How many hours before game time and tip off do you get to the arena? What is it when you wake up? What are some things you do to kind of get ready for the game, if any?
Yeah, good question. So normal call time, each team has their own thing. We're one of the kind of last people that have to show up. That's still generally I try and get there 2 hours to first pitch, tip off, kickoff, about 2 hours. A lot of that is number one, you avoid traffic. Number two, you may have some rehearsal stuff to do, and they want to do that prior to doors opening. It's not because you need that time to prepare or do anything special. It's all because of logistics. So you're also usually fed. So they want to have a rehearsal, feed you, and then have you in your spot at a certain point. So usually they want you there as the doors open or gates open or whatever they call it. And so to do that, and they may say, we're doing this special thing today, so we want to rehearse that. So that's why we need you there 2 hours. The worst was the Chargers. They actually wanted me there sometimes 3.5 hours early. And I'm thinking, Christ, why do you want me there that early? It's ridiculous. I sit there and I waste time. Part of it was because they weren't ready when they moved to LA. They got my first year with the Chargers was awful. They didn't have content. They were very much in transition. It was a terrible show. In fact, I was talking to my spotters and said, I don't know that I want to go back because it's really, really poorly done. And it was kind of unfair on me because they were thrown into the situation last minute and they were always trying to catch up. So I then actually had a pretty good dinner with the producer and the game director afterwards. And they said, you didn't seem very happy being here. And I go, I wasn't. I said, it was a shit show half the time. And they're like, we get it, but we're going to fix it. And here's what we'd like to do. And we'd like you to stay. I'm like, okay, we've had the talk. My second year was great. It was really fantastic. So, but I did kind of say, I'm like, I really don't need to be here 3 hours or 3.5 hours. A lot of the video people, the people that are working in the control room, they will be there 3.5 hours before, sometimes because content loading or they're having to do things. But basically, I can take half an hour to go through the script if there's anything. And you're going to find that no matter what the sport, they're very formulaic. They're going to have, this is our introduction, here's our pump piece, here's what we're selling. So, you have to make sure that you're, selling hats and shirts and all that. You have to make sure that you're selling tickets. You're there to make sure the anthem goes off right, or introduce people or special groups. There's that part. And then there's the game part. And I think what PA announcers really have to remember is you're always in two camps. You're part of the game day, production, calling the sport, doing all that. You're also part of the promotions team. So you have to make sure that you know what the merchandise is that you're going to be, not that you have to, try it on or doing, but you just have to know that you are there to sell shit too. Okay. I mean, that's always the thing that's part of it. You are helping to sell stuff, whether that be tickets, merchandise, future things, activities, camps, whatever it might be. So that's your promotions part, which is also the thing that I try to actually, not only should I know the names of all the athletes, but you're going to have people who you're announcing, who this will be the only time there will be announced at some particular event. And I put more emphasis on making sure I get their names right, because the athletes are going to have their names announced for a long time. Even if they're college athletes, it's here's this fireman that did something great, and you're going to, pump that person, or the teacher, they're recognizing the teacher, or they're, here's whatever it might be, the people from the community that are coming in, the season ticket holders. Get their names right. Put as much time into knowing Billy Swanson, the ticket salesperson, or whatever it might be, as LeBron James. You have to remember that this is their one time. The athletes, yeah, you got to know their names, and obviously there's some you're going to like, this is some crazy names, and that happens a lot. I mean, sometimes it's, in baseball, it was usually the Latin American players. You're like, okay, this is an interesting name. With basketball, you're getting Eastern Europeans and all kinds of, worldwide. You're like, oh, that's a name. So, you're going to work on knowing those, but you're almost always going to know those. And a lot of times they'll have the list for you. It's like, well, here's how you pronounce this guy's name. Okay, thanks. But you may have to go out of your way to make sure that you know this person's name, what they're doing. And I always like to to me, that there's almost more importance on that, because it's really special for those people. And just don't forget, you are there to sell stuff. That's part of your job. That's the other hat. You're calling your downs, pitches, balls, baskets, everything else, goals. But you do have this other part to you that's really, that oftentimes can make or break a good PA announcer, because they're going to go, oh man, you got a great call, but you fucked up 3 names over here of people that are really important, or have donated money, or have done something for a program, and they're pissed. Now you got to deal with the salespeople. Now you got to deal with the vice president, or of whatever it is, and they'll get on you. And so don't forget those people. Always remember, okay, who's, they're doing the little half court shot, or whatever it might be. Get their name right. That's really important. And too many people forget that.
There's nothing like my last name pronounced Soforenko and someone that says Sorrento. I'm like,
yeah,
like the Kia Sorrento. Come on. But yeah, that's. I really didn't think of it that way, because it's the worst feeling in the world. I would assume you get a lot, like, or just if there ever is a mess up, it's the worst getting called out. Like, I know, because sometimes there's those times where you're like, I know I messed it up, and then you got to hear it from, whether it be the fan base or whoever you're actually calling out.
Right.
But you mentioned before you got to go to the bubble.
Yes.
We all learned about how there's, TNT was there, ESPN play-by-play, all the television crew were there, but there were stadium announcers there too. I also want to hear about, in the bubble, how loud you guys actually could be, because I know that obviously it has to be turned down a little bit to kind of make it, bearable for the players. But yeah. Tell me a little bit about the travel part of it first. Like, was there the comfort level of, going to the airport and all that stuff? What was that like?
Good question. Yeah, I was on the COVID tour on the way to Florida, because I had to stop in Dallas, Texas at the time when Texas was absolutely raging, and then go to Florida when they were also raging. So I'm like, really? Where else do you want to send me? Where it's absolutely just inflamed the numbers. So I call it that I was on the COVID tour getting there. And it was, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of concern. I actually had, it was freaky coming home, having been in the bubble for 68, 69 days, tested on a daily basis, always, temperature, You got a test. You were away from everything. And then the first day we get in a van and we're heading to the airport, and I'm at the Orlando airport, and I'm just looking around going, not one of you people has been tested in the last 2 weeks, nor have you been in a bubble completely away from this entire disease. So coming home was actually a little freaky, more so even than going there. But that was just like a mental thing. Like, I didn't take the mask off. I think I like sipped water underneath my mask on the way home. And it was just like, no, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not going to go
That's
70 days of being free. Yeah. And then I'm in an airplane just looking around. So yeah, that was kind of weird. The best part of being in the bubble was, yeah, it was fun to be able to see these teams that you're normally never going to see on a regular basis. So, I mean, I announced for Phoenix several times. I announced for the Pacers several times. I did a couple Toronto games. I was doing a couple Nets games. So it was really interesting. That part is that you sometimes one days early on, mostly 2 games a day. So my first game could be Phoenix and Washington. And, Washington's a home team. So I'm having to pump up Washington, and they hit a 3 and you're yelling DC3, like whatever their thing is. And then an hour and a half after that game ends, I'm doing Dallas and OKC. And now I've got to pump the Dallas team, so that was kind of a weird, it's like we were there as NBA people who just happened to come from a team. And it wasn't actually until the playoffs that I actually got to announce any Clipper games. Nobody got to announce their own team during the regular play, which is kind of an interesting thing. They said it was just by happenstance. It wasn't. They planned it. They didn't want to give teams an unfair advantage, I guess. Anyway, so that part was great. The other part was so I was with the Brooklyn announcer, the Denver announcer, the Indiana Pacer announcer, and then myself. There were 4 of us there in the bubble. Really great guys, meeting the video crews or the producers and directors from different teams all around, the Milwaukee Bucks director, or I was with the, who was my director? Oh, the Houston Rockets director, so there was all these people that came together from around the country, different teams being represented, all for one purpose. That part was spectacular, just to meet these people, see what they do, to talk to the other PA announcers. And we had some very good, fun storytelling time of, highlights and lowlights and what about, and different referees and all that kind of stuff. So that part was really, really great to be able to just professionally be able to share time, and even beyond professionally, just human wise, just to meet people from all over the country in this very kind of compressed area. And so that part was wonderful. Getting there, and also being a California guy, to be in Florida for 3 months. Florida is hot and sticky. It rained just about every day, for at least 45 minutes to an hour. The humidity was just it defeated you sometimes. You just walk out and it just hits you like a frying pan. And so weather-wise, but I would say overwhelmingly the professional part was incredible. Regarding there were 3 stadiums. I actually was in the smallest stadium to begin with, called the Visa Center. We called it the JV court because the big teams didn't come there. Like I said, I was doing the Washington and Phoenix games, the San Antonio Spurs and the Indiana Pacers. All these kind of lower level teams played in there. Occasionally, Toronto would be there. I think the Lakers did come one time. But it was interesting because these teams were fighting to stay. So I don't know if you remember, Phoenix goes on this 8-0. They didn't lose while they were in the bubble. So early on over there, we're like, Phoenix, Christ, why do I care? But then they started winning, and all of a sudden it's like, are they going to do it again? And they ended up being like the hottest ticket on the, in the bubble, because people wanted to see, is Phoenix going to lose? And they didn't. They won every single game in the bubble, and they did everything. So that was great. The volume in ours, they controlled it pretty well, and they did a good job with the artificial crowd background. So that was kind of fun. I didn't really interact with the players that much. They did kind of keep us separate. A couple times I had breakfast, and Landry Shamet was there, and I talked to him, but just on general kind of how's life kind of questions. So I'm curious to know, did the the players even hear the crowd? You know, I mean, it was this artificial, it was sound, it was noise, but I think more than anything, it was just background noise. It wasn't like fans. So we the NBA did everything they could to artificially replicate, but it was, you know, it was as good as it's going to get, but it wasn't great. That's just all there is to it. It's just that, you know, they tried, they did everything they could, but you cannot replicate live fans. You just can't. And that's one thing we definitely learned, no matter how much. And they, I mean, they would respond to big threes. The crowds would come up and they had, you know, boards all around that had video stuff. And there were people that were watching and doing all that. It's just not the same. It just isn't. So
I feel like sometimes that's a positive, especially in the playoffs, because I don't think any fan at Staples Center would want to see their team give up a 3-1 lead to Denver. What was
right?
You got to be, I mean, obviously, I would assume there's obviously some fandom for you, you know, following the Clippers.
Oh yeah.
But and I'll say this confidently, I'm not a Lakers guy at all. So I'm glad we're on the same page somewhat. But you got to call the games, the Clipper game specifically in the playoffs, like you said.
Over home games, right?
Yes, right. What was that like? You know, here you are, you know, for, I don't know if it was about a month, but a couple weeks, you're doing a bunch of teams and a bunch of games where you're not really used to, but obviously, you know, you're a professional, you know how to do it. But then you're finally back to calling the Clipper home games.
Yeah.
What was that like in a bubble playoff atmosphere?
You know, you go about doing it the same way. I mean, you know, it's interesting because we were encased in plexiglass. Everybody around me had to have a mask on, except for me. The PA announcers could have their masks off, but we're encased. So it's almost like announcing a hockey game of sorts, and that there's this separation. So that part you were definitely aware of, that there was a physical barrier between you and the players. And it was you couldn't hear. The referees were mic'd up, and the reason they mic'd them up is so we wouldn't have been able to hear them the other way. And we had little box speakers by us, so they would say, you know, foul on number 32, and we could actually then hear that way.
They should keep doing that. I think that they should
100% agree.
Because us at home, there was a bunch of weird calls that we weren't really used to, you know, hearing, and we got to hear the refs talking to us, and I thought that was really cool. I think they're going to hopefully keep that.
I would hope so, especially if there is going to be the physical barrier, which I think for the near future that will be the case. And you're dead on right about the weird calls. For the first time in my life, a referee came and goes, "We have a disconcertion call against," I forget who it was against, and the ref said disconcertion, and everybody was like, fuck is disconcertion? We had no idea what disconcertion is. Disconcertion is if you are on the line for the free throw line and you do this with your hands, or you drop your down, you make a noise. That's illegal. You can't do it. Who knew? That's a disconcertion, and it was actually called 2 or 3 times in the bubble, of which it hadn't been. And we were actually in the swimming pool. We would actually, after the games and around the bubble, the refs and us shared the same pool. So I had some really great conversations with referees sitting poolside and just talking to them. And I said, "When's the last time you called disconcertion?" And a ref, he's like, 20 years ago, I called it one time. And so like, these were some of the craziest calls. We did have a 3 to make 2 on free throws, which, when's the last time that happened? So there were some very bizarre calls that afterwards were like, I've been announcing 20 years. I've never heard these calls ever. And so they came out. So that part was great. But kind of going back to your question, doing the games, once you were in it, I did the same cadence. I felt like I was back in it, but you always had in your mind, there are no fans and I'm physically separated from the action.
Weird, you know, it's like performing to an empty stadium or doing it at a 24-hour fitness gym, if you will.
You're darn right. Yeah, it was. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, they could have done these in high school gyms, much like the WNBA did. They could have probably done them there. They needed the bigger just because of lighting and back the boards and all that. But the games wouldn't have mattered where they were played. In fact, a lot of them were calling it. It was their AAU. It's going back to their AAU days. That's how they felt. These were like AAU games because very little crowd, and you'd have 4 a game, a day. So, yeah.
And that's sometimes a plus for players, just because I feel like that back in those days for the players, they were playing really good basketball and just to try and get noticed by people. And now here they are on that stage playing that back. But yeah, that's really interesting about the ref calls.
Yeah.
But let's kind of go back to pre-quarantine again. I know we're kind of going back and forth, but great atmosphere at Clippers games this year.
Very much.
Everyone was excited. They thought that they were going to beat LeBron. I had faith. I really did. But what was your favorite game to do this season at Staples Center?
Boston, bar none.
Really?
The Boston game, just because Kawhi had this baseline. He drove baseline.
Oh,
and in fact, I had it as my screensaver on my phone where he just hammered it over Daniel Tice. And it was just, it was a poster. And then blocks the shot at the end of the game in the corner. It was Crowder, I think, goes to shoot the ball from the corner, and Kawhi tips it. It was the overtime game. Boston was, there's still the tie between Doc and Boston, and it was by far the most fun game I did.
I wish I had it near me, but Lou Williams bobblehead night. That was that game.
Was it really?
It was,
oh.
And it was ironic because I remember Lou had a very, very good game, and he got the go ahead shot in OT, and then got the. I don't think it was a tying shot down the stretch in the fourth, but it was a good shot because I know Tatum tied it at the end. But
right.
Yeah, that was a good game. I'm happy I was there. But
you went to the best one I think I saw all game. Yeah, all this season.
As a performer, because obviously this is a performing type gig, are there any like jitters or butterflies? I would assume not at this point of your career,
not anymore.
But early on, as a young PA announcer, were there those jitters?
Dodger games probably more than Clipper, just because the size, and I wasn't a baseball guy, and so for me, and it was learning baseball. So one time, it was my first year, the Dodgers were having a preseason game, so I think it probably was Freeway Series or one of those games. Didn't count, but it was at Dodger Stadium. And I learned a very important lesson that game. A Dodger batter, had come out to the batting circle. And whoever the player was, I don't even remember who was in the circle, don't remember the plate, don't remember any of that. I just remember there was a batter that had come out, and whatever happened to the prior batter, he got on base or he got out. It was going to be a pinch hitter. And so he's out there. I see him. Boom. I hit, your attention, please. Now batting number so-and-so. Boom. Jim Tracy, who was the manager at the time, didn't want him to bat. He was out there as a decoy initially to see if they would do a pitching change. I learned that day is that because I announced him, he had to come to bat. The announcer is part of the action. And if you've been watching the World Series, they've had a couple times where they've brought out Choi, I think it is, from the Rays. They brought him out, and they wait until he's announced. And then Dave Roberts comes out and does a pitching change, and Choi has then gone back in. So he's announced. So that's like one of those things. Is that considered an at-bat, or is that it's one of those weird baseball things? So I announced this batter way back when. Within 30 seconds, the phone is ringing, and it's Jim Tracy. Why the fuck did he announce that batter? I didn't want him announced, blah, blah, blah. So now I remembered since, you wait until the umpire points. When the umpire points, then you can announce. But if you do it before he announces,
will he point at you? Will he point up?
What he will do is he'll usually wave and then point to the batter, or usually they'll look up and they'll point to same thing with the pinch runner. They'll kind of say pinch runner here. Whenever there's changes in the outfield, the home plate ump will kind of signal, and he'll tell me the number and the position, or the number in the batting order, and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of hand signal. It's like you're, in the middle of the stock exchange, and there's hand signals going on as you're getting who's replaced who and what batting position he is and all that kind of stuff. So that was one of the things I learned. So when I say, do I ever get nervous, it wasn't so much that I was, like, oh my God, I'm here. It's a matter of, I don't want to screw up, so that was, but no, nowadays I really don't. I get excited for it. I mean, I get pumped for it, but I'm not like, oh God, here we go. No, I'm too old. And all right, Logan, all the best to you, my man.
You as well. Nice to meet you. You stay safe out there.
Back at you, my friend. Thank you. Be
Absolutely.
well.
You as well.